Okay, so folks, so there's some pretty big news that came out this afternoon with regard to Canadian border restrictions. You need to hear this, you need to share this video. It's big news. Now, just to recap what's happened with regard to border restrictions, Conservatives were calling for border restrictions at the start of the pandemic. You'll remember way back at the beginning of 2020 when news was breaking in Wuhan about the spread of COVID, that the health minister in Canada at the time said border restrictions don't work. We were the first ones to call for this. We were always calling for strong border control measures, and the Liberals were late for it. Then months after, while COVID was raging across Canada, they put in place the hotel quarantine program. And if you follow me, you follow the work that I do as a member of Parliament, you know I've called for the end to this program. I've shown that the federal government doesn't have any data that shows that the hotel quarantine prevents the spread of COVID better than quarantining at home. So, and many people across the country have been asking for the federal government to come up with a plan to ensure that the border is secure, that it's secured against the spread of variants, etc., but that it's also coming up with a plan for benchmarks for allowing people for the hospitality and tourism industry to restart, especially, or families that are separated across the borders to reunite, using the tools that science has presented us, like therapeutics, vaccines, rapid tests, and better data. Countries around the world have already been doing this. The United States sure has, the United Kingdom, even the European Union has been talking about how it would lift border restrictions for fully vaccinated travelers. But today in Canada, something remarkable happened. So the federal government appointed an expert panel. It's called I'm going to go read it to get it right, the COVID-19 Testing and Screening Expert Advisory Panel. So it's not the federal Liberals themselves, it's a panel that they appointed of experts. This panel released a pretty significant report this afternoon that outlines a bunch of recommendations that the government could undertake in order for us to safely lift these restrictions using what? Science. Now, you'll remember, I have been calling for this for months and months. You remember I did a press conference calling for the end to the hotel quarantine program. Our whole party has, our leader has been out on this issue. He has been out talking about this. And even today in question period, we had colleagues that were asking about, when will there be benchmarks or criteria to get to this point. And the federal Liberal cabinet, even last night, if you guys watched my Facebook Live with Chrystia Freeland, I asked her this, the finance minister, over and over, and she's like, oh, I can't answer that. Well, today, this report came out, and here it is. Here it is, guys. Here's what this report is saying. So I've got the link. It'll be in the video description up above. You can go to it. And there's this table here. I'm sorry for the resolution, but it tells you what four categories of people can and can't do upon entering the country. And those four categories are unvaccinated, partially vaccinated, so 1 dose of vaccine, fully vaccinated, both doses of vaccine, or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine if you've somehow got that, as well as if you've had a positive case of COVID and recovered from it. So I won't keep this up, but I'm going to go through what the recommendation said. Now, I want to be very clear, the federal government haven't adopted these recommendations yet. They're the recommendations from this expert panel, okay? So if you are not vaccinated, this is what this panel is advising: that you have a pre-departure test, negative test, before you come into the country, that you have an on-arrival test when you come into the country, and you have to quarantine until day 7 when you get another test. And if you have a negative test at that point, then you can exit quarantine. That's a recommendation. And for those of you who have had to travel during the pandemic internationally, if you entered Alberta during a certain period of time, this was essentially what the Alberta Border Pilot Program was, that the federal Liberal government, of course, scrapped. So that's for unvaccinated persons. For partially vaccinated persons, so 1 dose, the panel recommends that you have a pre-departure negative test, an on-arrival test, but that you only quarantine until you get that negative test back on arrival. Okay, so not the full 7 days plus another test, it's just the on-arrival negative test. For fully vaccinated persons, what the report is saying is that you would have an arrival test. for people who have shown that they have had a previous negative COVID test within 14 to 180 days. You'll want to read the report to get the exact recommendations. It's saying an on-arrival test and then exit without exit after you get the negative results of that. So 4 categories of people, clear recommendations. But the report itself recommends very clearly that the hotel quarantine program essentially be immediately scrapped, which we've been calling for months, right? So this is a data-driven scientific report that is calling upon that is giving the federal government advice on how to proceed. Now, if you've watched my feed, you'll know I've been asking these questions for months, right? Even last week, I asked Teresa Tam, like, well, you know, when would fully vaccinated travelers be exempted from quarantine, right? And it was like, even last night, Chrystia Freeland asked the finance minister on this, around assumptions on the budget. And, you know, the response back was so arrogant. It was so smug. And it was like, wow, we shouldn't be talking about that. We should be, you know, just now. And, you know, look, many of you, so many Canadians have gone out and got the vaccine. Many of you have been following provincial governments like BC, like Alberta, like Saskatchewan, who have put forward clear plans on reopening based on vaccine metrics. And we need hope, right? Like, we need hope. Life should get back to normal. Of course, we should be taking strong public health measures, but we should be getting back to normal. And this report today clearly gives advice. This is huge, huge news. Every major media outlet is reporting on this. It gives some recommendations, some advice to the government, and an ounce of hope to you, both from the perspective of, you know, sustainable public health measures to manage the border, but also hope for people to be able to travel again. And you know what? Let's talk about that, right? We should be talking about how we do that. Like, that's a hopeful thing. We should be talking about hope at this point. I think we all deserve a little hope, right? And this has really been the Conservative message for months now. Again, you'll remember that motion that we put forward in the House in March, and we're saying the federal government should be developing benchmarks and a plan for reopening based on what? Vaccines, rapid tests, therapeutics, and better data. And that's exactly what the scientific panel is talking about today. So it's encouraging. Now, the question becomes, what does the government do with this, right? They sure have shied away. A couple of things to watch. Prime Minister wants to go to the Group of 7 or the G7 meetings, which are happening overseas in a couple of weeks. Do you think Justin Trudeau wants to spend 2 weeks in his hotel quarantine when he comes back to Canada? Do you guys think he wants to do that? I don't think so. I think that Justin Trudeau is very self-interested, and I think that he might look at this report as a way to weasel out of something that he should have done a long time ago. But at the end of the day, what we all want and what we all should be fighting for is a hopeful plan based on science and metrics that keeps us all safe while also getting life back to normal, right? We can talk about that. We can talk about life getting back to normal here, I hope. Share this video, read this report. This is so important. These things are, like, this is exactly what the federal government should be putting forward at this point in time. So this is a seed of hope. This is the first time I have seen any part of the federal government put out some sort of advice on this. What Justin Trudeau and his cabinet will do with it is, a different question, especially given the responses that we've received recently. I will put forward a longer video with clips from the last few days of all these questions that we've been asking. But look, this is what effective opposition does. I've been fighting on this, fighting hard. You guys, you know how hard I've been fighting and putting political pressure on the government. That now we need to collectively kick this over the goalposts so that we can get life back to normal while being safe. And that's exactly what I'm going to get back to doing tonight. Working hard for you in Calgary. Share this video. Get behind this. Have a great evening.